All right, AP Hug. Let's see if we can do this in about, well, I'm going to make the challenge 15, 20 minutes max, okay? This might be one of those videos where instead of just speeding up my voice a little bit to make the notes go faster, you may end up having to, I don't know, you might have to end up slowing it down. We'll see how it goes, right? We finished off in class and we were looking at the three parts that make up the core periphery model. So the idea of core countries, middle income countries, and periphery countries. And so from there we get into kind of the guts of Wallerstein's theories, and that is his world system theory. And pretty simple. Here we go. All right. So I'm going to go back up here and connect up above to that core periphery model. So those peripheral countries, those LDCs, primary sector. So in other words, focus on natural resources, okay? Obtaining natural resources, whether through agriculture, mining, things like that, okay? That is one part of the world system theory. Semi-peripheral countries. That kind of gets into those, what above we might call those emerging countries, those middle income countries. Secondary, so they're processing the natural resources, right? They're actually doing something with them. And then third is the core countries, right? And if I connect back up there to the top, all right, highly developed countries. Again, these are countries that are more focused on, the tertiary end of things, whether it is, service-based, knowledge-based, those kinds of things, okay? And so another way of kind of like being able to order and structure countries into categories. Now, just like with Rostow's model, there's a lot of criticisms of these, which I don't know, to a certain extent, always kind of goes natural whenever you're trying to do any of this, kind of like, categorizing countries and putting them into different columns. There's going to be a lot of people that just say that the world is a little more complex than that. And so some of those criticisms of Wallerstein does get into everything from non-governmental organizations and their role and what they're able to bring to different parts of the world. NGOs are things like, I'm thinking Amnesty International and it's organizations. A lot of times, they bring food, they bring aid to countries that are typically going to be those peripheral countries, who less developed countries that need help, and so the impact that they have, and then just the idea that kind of like with Rostow's as well. That when we look at the world going here in the 21st century, some of this, just trying to categorize the way they do seems a little passe, a little outdated, okay? All right, last section that we run into here is what we call sustainable development, okay? And so basically a definition of that, and you can see a more expanded one on your vocab sheet, but that is trying to control development in a way that, we get what we need now, but also it's with an eye to the future, and trying to make sure that we're being responsible and good stewards, and that future generations are going to have everything they need to be successful. All right. So some obstacles to sustainable development. First of all, what we call resource depletion. Just the idea that coal is a finite resource. There can come a day. Same with oil. Technically speaking, even water. These are all resources that they aren't endless. There's just not an endless supply of them. All of them can be eventually. I mean, it might not be in my lifetime, may not be in your lifetime, but eventually these will be depleted. And once we're, obviously once we're without water, we're no longer a functioning planet. But take coal or oil out of the picture, we better have alternative energy sources ready to go to take their place. Okay, environmental degradation that we've talked about before. So whether we're talking about the pollution of the air or water, whether we're talking about climate change, and to what extent climate change has a real impact on our climate, not weather, on climate, those kinds of things. I mean, scientists one after another around the world say that us humans right now are on a crash course of basically creating enough degradation to make an impact on the ability of life to be able to continue on our planet in the long run. Okay, I know that there's critics of those things and say that they are overblown, exaggerated, but when we look at the evidence in front of us, and just the increase in storm systems and the intensity of hurricanes, things like that that tie in with climate change. And then we just look at the amount of plastics in the ocean, stuff like that. I mean, we know that there are issues involved here. All right. So the flip side of that, encouraging sustainable development. Well, recycling is one that has really picked up in about the last 25, 30 years. This was a movement that really began to kind of had its origins back in the 70s with the first Earth Day and that sort of thing, where there started to be more attention paid to that sort of thing. So that has developed, and I, like maybe some of you, end up doing a lot of sorting nowadays, and aluminums and plastics and things like that, cardboard, instead of just everything going into the garbage can. All right. Regulations. So rules that are set by governmental agencies like the Environmental Protection Agency that take a role on in trying to control the spread of pollution, the effects of pollution. Try to enforce regulations that push back on the factors that we know play a role in causing climate change, whether it is pollutants and things like that. Again, this is always kind of gets into some squishy ground. I mean, currently, our government is bringing down a lot of these regulations, bringing them to an end, saying that they've gotten in the way of businesses being able to to function and profit. And so we're always trying to find that middle ground where, I mean, people can make a living, but we're not destroying the planet in the process. And right now we seem to be in kind of a cycle, at least in the United States, where we're going to see a lot of the regulations that have been, enacted in the last 20, 30 years start to be either eliminated or the impact of them buffered somewhat to allow for businesses to be able to operate with less of those kind of rules holding them back. Okay. Ecotourism. This is something that we definitely have started to see more and more of in the 21st century. And a lot of credit is given to a lot of younger people, younger generations, millennials, Gen Z. And this is, instead of going on the vacations like I go to, where, I go and see all the sights and eat the food, and, and when I can't eat anymore and see anymore, I come home. These are vacations that are a little bit more, some people think it was like more extreme vacations, where maybe you're getting some of the wilderness experience, more of the adventure kind of vacation. But ones that also, at the same time that you're being able to see all these beautiful places, that you might have guides and stuff like that. They're also talking to you about, what efforts are being made in whatever region, country that you're in, to try to preserve that, so that the beauty you're seeing is still going to be around in another 10 years, 20 years, for others to be able to take advantage of. Okay. I think when I was in Hawaii back in 2014, we went on a couple of tours that fell more in this category, where the guides talked to us a lot about the efforts that they're making in the Hawaiian Islands to preserve the natural environment there. Okay. All right. Let's see. Section 4 to Section 5. There we go. We've got women and economic development. Hey, going back again, we talk about this in AP Hug. In every unit, there's at least a little bit of a cutout to it's like, remember, 50% of the world population, yeah, they're women, and so making sure that their efforts, their really the story they play isn't being swept under the rug or underestimated, that kind of thing. Okay, and so this is a truism. Statistics bear it out that when you look at the higher the status that women have in a country, so more political rights, more opportunities when it comes to work, when it comes to education, that we see higher levels of development in those countries. Okay, when it's kind of common sense if you think about it. I mean, if you're in a country where your culture or your laws make it difficult for half of your population to get ahead because that's just the tradition or the culture, that's going to limit you, and the opposite's going to be true. All right. And so, when we look at like the gender inequality index that we introduced you to a little longer there, again, we look at countries like Europe that have very low GIIs, and they all happen to be highly developed countries. Women have lots of opportunity in front of them in terms of what they want to do with their lives, right? Um, and then, where we see really, really high GII, really high gender inequality index is in a lot of those traditional lower developed parts of the world, lower developed countries that we might find in West Africa and Southwest Asia. And in those countries, whether it's out of tradition, whether it's out of culture, whether it's out of their legal system, women do not have as many opportunities, right? As we kind of learned with, Don't Panic way back when, a lot of those parts of the world are starting to change. Change may come slow, but a lot of them are beginning to recognize that, what was good 100 years ago is actually holding those countries back, going, deeper into the 21st century, all right? And just kind of tying back in with what we said up there in A, right? It's born. It's just not an idea. It's just not, I think, I get a sense. No, there are statistics and everything else that bear it out and prove that, this is reality. Okay. All right. And let's see, from there, we'll jump into here again, back to our talking about NGOs. Let me give you some more specific examples. I feel like I was really vague with that before, there's a number of organizations. UNICEF is one of them. UNICEF just sounds kind of with a C, the way it sounds. World Vision. In fact, I had a good friend that worked for World Vision for years. Oxfam is another. I mentioned Amnesty International already. Save the Children is another. And these are organizations that are not attached to any government. That's what I mean, NGO, non-governmental organizations. They operate independently, and both of them really. That's their effort, is to try to help LDCs to improve and to develop further. Okay, and so we see that from NGOs. We see that from some transnational corporations. That are beginning to change, especially in some of those LDCs, where they're traditionally most of the work is being done at home, agricultural work, that kind of thing, and we're starting to see more and more of that shift over, more work being offered outside of the home for women. Okay, yes, well, sorry, we are still on that topic of women. We haven't left it. And then, just another truism, and this is just as true here in the United States as anywhere else in the world, that, the more education anyone gets, the higher they're going to be able to demand in terms of their pay. Okay. And in a lot of these developing parts of the world, that's where a big effort is being made, is to try to get more educational opportunities for women, so that they can gain higher pay. And what I say there is still less than males. That's unfortunately also true still here in the United States. Women with the same level of education, same level of work experience, everything else like that, do not make as much as men, just because they're women. All right. Let's see, microloans and microcredit, another vocab term that you got in there. Basic definition. You got a better one on your sheet, I believe, there. But this has been a trend that we've seen in the last number of years, where financial corporations, banks, savings and loans, things like that operate in LDCs, will provide these just small money loans. This isn't like, hey, I need $10,000. This is like, I need maybe, $500. And a lot of times it allows women to kind of start their own little small business. Might be kind of like knitting or sewing something, maybe producing some kind of a craft. The money can be used to maybe buy a little bit more land that can then be planted for more crops. So for subsistence farming, that sort of thing. And so microloans and microcredit is one way that we've seen that come into play. All right, moving along here, lowering the gender index equality. Again, it's kind of news of, hopefully, I'm not going to say the obvious, but it doesn't take a major leap of imagination, that where we have, regions, countries around the world that have lower GII indexes, that we see women who have the full potential to, hold leadership in a corporation, or leadership, in the country itself, political leadership, where women's voices are listened to and not discounted just because they're women. And so, you have that kind of thing that also ties in with those lower GIIs. Okay, barely. Huh. Okay, barely. And then another tie-in with Don't Panic. We talked about he talked about in Bangladesh. Rosling did about how smaller families have also created more opportunities for women, and more you can just do with your life when you don't have 10, 11 kids. It creates more flexibility. And so access to contraceptives has played a big role in that in some of the LDCs, and developing parts of the world. By having smaller families, we've also seen in those countries that infant mortality rates go down as well, because with smaller families, usually means that there's more resources to make sure that your kids are being properly cared for. All kind of ties in together. All right, and then boom. What we see, at least right now, and this is really where Hans Rosling was all about, is that as much as people want to get all rattled and scared about where the world is going and overpopulation and 8 billion, what are we going to do? Um, the reality is that we are actually seeing the problem going in the opposite direction and not being as much of a problem as it's been in the past. It's something we can never just stop and say, okay, good, that's it's fixed. It's because continually we see new issues popping up around the world that potentially cause potential for problems that could make overpopulation still be an issue that we have to deal with. We could make some of the efforts that we've taken not as effective as they've been. So it's not one of those things that we get to pat ourselves on the back and just say, problem solved. What's next? We have to continue to pay attention to it. And that is a way that we see those less developed parts of the world have an opportunity to catch up with everyone else. All right, which is one of the big themes as we wrap up here on Unit 7, all of our industrialization and all that kind of business. All right, there we go. Yeah, barely. Holy cow. I can't put enough emphasis on that. But that will cover you for the rest of Unit 7. All right. It went fast. I know it was probably obviously was the least effective of all of our units. And it does mean you're going to have to do a little bit more of the lifting on that one on your own. Watch more Mr. Sin, even if I didn't assign it. Look for other resources on Unit 7, even though I didn't assign it. You're going to need to take care of yourself to make sure that you are still ready for the AP test, because they're going to assume that you are as familiar with Unit 7 as you are with every other unit. So do what you got to do to basically to plug the gap. Okay? All right, but that will cover us almost 18 minutes. All right, not too bad. All right, guys. See you back in the room.